Order, and welcome to this afternoon's session of the Justice Select Committee, which is the second evidence session in our inquiry into access to justice. We have two panels this afternoon. The first, which is a relatively short panel, because it consists just of Professor Linda Mulcahy, who is going to talk to us about sources of funding for the justice system. I'll get Professor Mulcahy to introduce herself in a moment, but first the members of the committee need to do their declarations of interest, starting with Pam Cox.
Good afternoon, I'm Pam Cox, MP for Colchester. My interests are as declared on the register.
I'm Neil Shastry-Hurst. I'm the Member of Parliament for Solihull West and Shirley. My interests are as declared on the register. I would highlight that I'm a practising barrister with a practising certificate. I'm an associate tenant of number 5 Chambers, and I'm a former Vice Chair of the APPG for Access for Justice.
I'm Andy Slaughter. I'm the MP for Hammersmith and Chiswick. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm a non-practising barrister. I'm the patron of a couple of justice-related charities, the Upper Room and Hammersmith and Fulham Law Centre, and I'm a member of the GMB and Unite Trade Unions.
Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Farnsworth. I'm the Member of Parliament for Amber Valley, former Crown Prosecutor, and I am the co-chair for the APPG on Legal and Constitutional Affairs, a member of the Access to Justice APPG, and everything else is as per the register.
My name is Tessa Munt. I'm the Member of Parliament for Wells and Mendip Hills in Somerset. Everything's on the register, but I will just point out I am a director and vice chair of Whistleblowers UK, which is a not-for-profit organisation. I'm also the vice chair of the APPG on penal affairs.
Hi, I'm Matt Bishop, Member of Parliament for the Forest of Dean, former police officer, and my declarations are as on the register.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Warren DeJust, MP for Wolverhampton West. I'm a member of various APPGs and a member of the JMB Executive Council Trade Union. Relevant to today's discussion, I worked as a solicitor for Thompson's Trade Union Law Practice for over 30 years before becoming an MP and specialising in personal injury and clinical negligence claims, and I'm a solicitor, although not practising.
Thank you very much. Well, you know who we are. Would you like just very briefly to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Linda Mulcahy. I'm a professor at the Centre for Socio-Legal Studies at the University of Oxford, and I've been doing empirical research into access to justice for almost 40 years. And I've recently received a Nuffield Foundation grant to look into additional funding models for the free legal advice sector, and we're about 9 months into a 2-year project.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. To start on one specific proposal we know you are involved in, the government's recently launched a consultation on the implementation of an interest on lawyers' current client account scheme in England and Wales. Could you explain what that scheme is, and do the government's proposals align with what you consider to be best practice?
Okay. Thank you. That's a really juicy question to start off with. We've been researching into these schemes, which the Ministry of Justice is calling ILCA schemes. They're actually called lots of different things all over the world, but I'll just stick with that term. And I think there's tremendous potential for them to provide really critical resources for a free legal advice sector that I think everybody acknowledges is in crisis. I've recently finished a project on the law centres network, and we found that there's tremendous difficulty with recruiting new lawyers, and I think there's a real fear that the next generation of legal aid practitioners won't be in place because of lack of funding and that expertise passing on. So ILCA schemes, I think, are quite attractive. They work really efficiently in about 77 other jurisdictions across the world. They started in Australia actually as a result of a decision that was made by the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords. So the impetus, if you like, started in England and Wales and Scotland, and it was a Scottish case, and it's rather ironic that we are one of the last common law jurisdictions to even be thinking about introducing a scheme. They're taken up in Australia, subsequently moved over to Canada, and there are now all the 50 states in the US and 3 of their territories now have these schemes. So the basic idea of an ILCA scheme is that the organisations that are running them are basically scooping up lots and lots of small amounts of interest that are accruing on funds that clients leave with their solicitors. Now, if we're instructing a solicitor and we have a lot of money that we have to give them up front, that would probably be put in an account in our own name. It's a designated account. But for most of the money that people put into solicitor's account, it just stays there. Maybe a large amount of money that stays there for a short amount of time, or it might be a small amount of money that stays there for a long period of time. And the interest that it accrues isn't very much. So those funds are all put together in one pooled account. Now, those pooled accounts are really interesting because if the individual client asks for their money back, they will probably be told it will cost us more to calculate and send you this money back than the actual interest that's accrued. So I think all over the world it's accepted that it's not very economical to give that money back to the consumer of legal services. But various things happen to that money, tiny, tiny little amounts of money, but once they're pooled in an account, that actually gives solicitors firms the potential to say to the bank, we've actually got quite a lot of money that we're holding here. It's made up of lots and lots of tiny bits, but we'd like you to give us a higher rate of interest on that. And our research shows that some solicitors are prepared to share some of that additional interest with their client, but others aren't. And that's in the terms and conditions. There's nothing strange or inappropriate going on there, although I'm not sure the consumer would quite understand the terms in the contract that mean that they effectively never get any of the interest back. But some law firms we know are then, in addition to that, they are putting that money in overnight investments in the overnight monies market, and it's there in the account at 9 o'clock the next morning when their client may want it, but they are then getting another tier of money in addition to the enhanced interest they get from having a large pool. And then, of course, there's more money to be made by the banks who love solicitors, firms banking their money with them. It's good business, it's a healthy industry. And they will, of course, not always be passing on all the money that they can make through investing lots of pooled accounts to the firms themselves. So ILCA schemes are a way of pulling that money back in and putting it to good use. So all over the world, and this isn't what the Ministry of Justice is actually suggesting at the moment in their consultation paper, because they are not really naming any beneficiaries of an ILCA scheme. All over the world, about 75% of that money that is generated is going to free legal advice. And then the rest of the money is going to a whole variety of other projects, but some of them, many of them are still to do with access to justice. And if I could just give you some figures that are literally hot off the press, because we've been doing interviews all over, with people all over the world. I've converted all these figures into pounds. In 2023, which was a good year for interest rates, so that meant that there were lots of, these accounts were generating more money, the Ontario ILCA scheme generated 260 million. The British Columbia ILCA scheme generated 125 million, and the New South Wales scheme generated 83 million. Now, there are a number of reasons which we continue to explore why some schemes are doing better than others. So one of the things I think it's important to say to the committee is that the design of these schemes is absolutely essential. And if we're talking about what the Ministry of Justice is proposing at the moment, I think a lot of their statements and proposals aren't actually evidence-based. And I think that there's a lot more work. My opinion is there's a lot more work to be done in the detail of the scheme. But just perhaps coming back briefly to what you asked me about the Ministry of Justice, I can't see that anyone's supporting this scheme in the not-for-profit sector at the moment or in the legal services sector. There are no beneficiaries. It's really obvious to me that we need those beneficiaries to be legal aid firms who are at the moment using this interest they earn to cross-subsidise so that they can do more legal aid work. I think we desperately need it to go to law centres and free legal advice services across the country that are in crisis. So the fact that there are no named beneficiaries, I think, means that we all worry that the civil justice system is once again cross-subsidising prisons and the criminal justice system, which has happened repeatedly over a 30 or 40-year period. I think Hazel Genn's research demonstrates that. The Ministry of Justice is also suggesting that they administer the scheme. That's a very unusual way to go about it. The funds are normally given to an independent foundation that is separate from government. There are 7 schemes we can find in the world that are in the executive branch or the judicial branch, but being in the executive branch is very unusual. And one of the problems with that, and we're seeing this in the US at the moment, is there is a danger that government will grab that money that has been set aside to support the free legal advice sector because it starts looking attractive when interest rates are high, and it will take it away and put it to a completely different purpose. So I think people within the free legal advice sector, especially in America where it's recently happened, in New York, in North Carolina, and also in Alberta, that money has been taken away. So there are dangers, I think, in the Ministry of Justice's current schemes that this would be administered by government. And there are other things that I could say about that proposal, but perhaps you have other questions.
So in terms of the pitfalls along the route here, are you saying, first of all, that firms aren't making the most of the opportunity, i.e. the money is not being generated, whoever it goes to, and that they could do better than that? And how would you, I mean, one would have thought that they would want to invest it and get the best rates of return on it, whatever purpose the money was put to, particularly if you're saying it could run into hundreds of millions of pounds a year.
Yeah.
But is that happening at the moment? Are most solicitors' firms maximising the income they can get from?
It's impossible to know. You may know that in our written evidence, the Select Committee, we outlined a study that we'd done of client interest policies from the 214 firms that we could find that publish them on the web. That means that there are a lot that we haven't looked at, but we think our sample is actually fairly representative of different types of solicitors' firms. And it varies. It varies. If you look in the grey literature that's written by financial consultants, they are often advertising their services to help law firms enhance the money that is made available. So I think they are all making money out of it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think Solicitors Regulatory Authority also has some data on that. That hasn't been public.
It would be weird if they weren't making the most of it. But the reason I asked the question is that I think a lot of slides suggested that evidence from solicitors was that many of them would not be able to survive if they didn't have this source of funding, which might say something about the precarious nature of the firms anyway, if they're relying on this windfall effectively.
I think that's certainly true of legal aid providers, and I think we need to take that argument very seriously as far as legal aid providers are concerned. As far as other firms are concerned, I mean, under the Solicitors Regulatory Authority accounts rule, they are supposed to be solvent without having to rely on client funds. So there is an issue there, again, that I know the Solicitors Regulatory Authority has written about. Mm-hmm. But I think there are a lot of very vibrant, healthy law firms out there who are making quite a lot of money from this, a significant amount of money. It's SRA that will know that, and they haven't put that number in the public domain, which I do think is a matter of public interest, that they should put that figure in the public domain, so that we know how much is actually being collected. Now, I have spoken to a couple of big city law firms, because I'm interested in where they fit with all of this. And some of them don't want this money. They think it's questionable ethically that they make money out of client funds, and so some of them are actually putting the money in non-interest-bearing accounts. And we also found that in our review that there are a minority that just don't even want to get into the quagmire of an ethical dilemma of feeling that they are making money out of their clients. And that's actually the success of the project in Australia and Canada and America, is that lawyers do not want to handle this money. They do not see it as their money. And so by giving it back to free legal advice sector, they see themselves as enhancing the rule of law, in making sure that they're making they are playing their part in ensuring that there's access to free legal advice by the disadvantaged. So it's actually a badge of pride on their part that they are somehow giving back by helping to oil the wheels of these ILCA programs. And in fact, across the world, there are quite a lot of bar associations and law societies that actually run this scheme.
Can you see any barriers to the scheme?
There are undoubtedly some disadvantages, and I could really bore you on this point. I know you haven't got long, so I'll try not to do that. But I think the devil is in the detail. One of the beauties of having 77 schemes across the world, some of which have been running for over 60 years, is over time they change. And the 2008 financial crisis was a really significant moment, because suddenly these ILCA schemes were finding they were getting no interest. You know, their funds were really going down. So the volatility of funds, because they rely on the interest rates at any given time, means that they're quite vulnerable, really, to ups and downs. But since 2008, what we've really noticed in our interviews with scheme directors is that they are increasingly building up an investment portfolio with the full support of their Supreme Court or whichever agency is actually facilitating the operation of the scheme. And so they don't give away every year what they are earning. They use excess in good years, we're having good years at the moment, to put some money into an investment so that over time, when they have a bad year, they can then even out that investment. So I think we're learning a lot. There are also two devices that are being commonly talked about now. One is the comparability clause and the other one is the safe harbour clause. And these are ways of negotiating with banks that on the whole come screaming and kicking to the table. They don't want to share more of this interest. They don't necessarily, perhaps I'm being a little unfair there, but we are told by the scheme directors that the banks will only give you a decent interest rate if you negotiate hard with them. The fact that they have so much money to play with gives them that negotiatory power. So there are devices that are in place to try and make the banks pay a fair rate. I think the safe harbour rule, which is not the one that is preferred by the Ministry of Justice at the moment, there are indications from our data that is the more successful one. What you do in a safe harbour rule is that you say that the bank has to pay the ILCA Foundation by reference to a known rate, like the federal funds rate or the Bank of Canada overnight rate. And you might say you have to pay 65% of that rate. If you go up to 80, the banks don't want to opt in. About 65% of that. Or a 1% interest rate. They also have a floor, whichever is the higher.
The important point, if I'm taking this correctly from what you're saying, is that firstly you should maximise what the income can be, and secondly it should be directed to the not-for-profit sector.
Yeah.
And the best way of ensuring those things is by having an independent body in control of the process.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. Verinder.
Yeah, thank you for that. As regards other funding options, in addition to ILCAs, what do you think are the other potentially most beneficial funding options that could help improve access to justice? And if I can also add, this week is Heart Unions Week, where people like myself and others are going around encouraging people to become trade union members. And as you will be aware, that trade unions have trade union legal services. So have you also considered how we may improve trade union legal services to help those who have access to justice where they are trade union members?
We haven't done any research specifically into the trade union movement, although I am aware from the work that I've done on law centres that were often areas where trade unions weren't able to give people expert legal advice on welfare benefits, etc. There's a particular focus, but I would acknowledge very readily that trade unions have been an important part of this sort of landscape. We have been looking at a number of other schemes. We've been looking at levies on commercial law firms, which was mooted by both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party at different times. That actually seems to have been put on the back burner and isn't being discussed at the moment. We've been looking at the redirection of dormant client funds. You will know from being a solicitor that sometimes you have funds that you can't actually trace back who is the legal owner in it. But interestingly, in a number of jurisdictions, those schemes, that money already goes into the ILCA Foundation. So ILCA Foundations often gather up these different pots of money because it's quite efficient to put it through them. We're looking at legal expenses insurance. We haven't had the opportunity to look into that in as much depth as ILCA at the moment. I think the most important alternative scheme is residual funds on successful collective actions. Our partner in our research is the Access to Justice Foundation, and under the Consumer Rights Act of 2015, they are actually the recipient of any residual funds on large-scale collective actions where not all the class have actually claimed the money that they can do from the damages. That's a fairly new area, and we've just got cases coming through now, and a number of those, there's judicial review in the process of being taken on one and an appeal on the other. But the problem with that money, again, is it's volatile. So I think it would be, because you don't know when a collective action is going to be successful. There are also issues around whether if there's an out-of-court settlement, foundations like the Access to Justice Foundation would have a right to a portion of the settlement, and that's a legal issue that is being considered at the moment. But that seems to be a big generator of funds when it comes. But again, it's volatile. So I think an organisation running these things that has the potential to have an investment portfolio is really important, so they can take in the money when there's a lot of it there and then spread it out over the years. I suspect a government agency would be much worse placed to do that than a private foundation.
Thank you for that. You've referred to legal expenses insurance, and again, people take out household insurance, can have legal expenses insurance as part of it. At the moment, it excludes legal expenses in criminal cases, and the Bar Council is saying that such a restriction should be removed. Have you considered that restriction should be removed, or is it something that you haven't looked into?
I'm afraid we're only 9 months into a 2-year project. Fine. We've been working really hard on ILCA schemes to get data ready for the Ministry of Justice. But I suppose some reservations about legal expenses insurance is, first of all, I think there is an incentive on insurance companies not to pay you, not to support you, because that's what their business model is based on. And if we're thinking about the most disadvantaged in society, I am not sure that they would be able to afford to take out insurance of this kind. So I think there are issues. But John Sarabji at University College London is really an expert in this field. And I know he's talked a lot about some successful schemes in Germany, which may be worth looking at. One of the things we wanted to explore when we come to look at legal expenses insurance is whether housing associations as a group might be able to purchase group insurance. That's something that we'd like to explore with the sector.
And out of all the schemes that you've mentioned, which one do you think would be the best in terms of generating sufficient and reliable funding? Which would you? Well,
we've always said that we want to adopt a portfolio approach, that all of these schemes have potential. I mean, actually, in a number of jurisdictions, solicitors and barristers will pay a portion of their annual bar fees or registration fees to Access. And these smaller amounts can sometimes be a stable income. So, even the smaller amounts have their part to play. But if I was going to put my money on anything, it would be residual funds on successful collective actions, and most importantly, ILCA, if it is designed properly and the beneficiaries are those in the free legal advice sector.
Final question from me then. What safeguards do you think might be necessary to ensure that the funding, the income generated to improve access to justice is used for that purpose? Do you think that we need to put in any safeguards to ensure that the money is used for the purpose that it's generated?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen in examining 77 schemes is that it's often put in a statute or an enabling set of rules that the money, for instance, in a couple of schemes in Canada, it said that 75% of the income has to go into the legal aid fund. And in other instances, I'm thinking, particularly I was looking at California this morning, that a proportion of their funds have to go into free legal advice. And actually, if you look at any ILCA schemes or IOLTA schemes, as they are called in the States, you will see on the front pages that this foundation was set up specifically with this goal in mind. So I think it has to be very clear from the outset, and I think it has to be based in statute. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask you one maybe final question, which is it feasible that the various sources of funding that you've talked about could form the basis for funding a not-for-profit sector? Are the quantums going to be of that order? And B, is there going to be is it a reliable source of income if it's dependent on interest rates of one particular time, in enforcing the payment and things of that nature? Because clearly you can't say to whether they're law centres or any other agencies, well, we'll give you this much this year and we'll wait and see what happens in the future. Although actually they're probably quite used to living in that way, but it's not ideal. So is this what you envisage this being, effectively a replacement from some previous state funding?
No, I don't think so at all, and it's why our project is called Additional Funding for the free legal advice sector. I think if you look at Ontario, which is probably the most successful scheme financially in 2023, that would be about a quarter of our legal aid budget. But our argument from the beginning isn't that this is a replacement for legal aid. I mean, legal aid has had a big shot from 2013 onwards. It's that it would be additional funding, and that it would help to create a more sustainable funding model.
That's still a very large sum of money.
It's still a very large sum of money. I think if it's managed properly through investment, as we're learning from the various schemes that have been going for decades, that they can be successful in ensuring that a core number of legal aid providers are looked after over time. And I've talked a lot to directors of these schemes about this. They say if we invest the money, we can normally say to a scheme, we can look after you. Even if we've got an annual cycle of funding, we think we can look after you with this reserve. We can look after you for 3 years. That would give you 3 years' notice that there may be, a dip in interest rate that we can't manage through our reserve. So I think the schemes are becoming increasingly sophisticated in managing that. But one of the things I'm aware of is that you can't always tell what they're doing by the level of grants they give out every year, because behind the scenes, they are looking after their core beneficiaries every year, who they think are the most expert, efficient providers of free legal advice. And in years when they have extra money, they may do some other infrastructure funding rounds or whatever, but they are always trying to look after core providers. So, for instance, in New Zealand, the money goes towards the funding of law centres.
But the system in New Zealand, there is a comprehensive law centre network, if I understand it correctly. What you often have in the UK is advice desert areas where there is little or no provision or only limited scope. Would you see this as filling in the gaps there?
I think it could make a significant contribution to doing so. And I think the free legal advice sector is just looking for any possibilities where they could have a significant influx of funds. I think if you get the right people funding it who are concerned about the sustainability of the sector and want to ensure that there is income over time, it could prove successful. And it has proven successful in a number of other jurisdictions.
May I? Just a quick one. I just want to, my papers tell me you're the world expert really on stuff. That's very nice. It's good. Thank you for saying this. I just wondered if you'd had the opportunity to speak to ministers about stuff in which you specialise and about this in particular.
No, we've been in touch with the Ministry of Justice, and we're very interested in feeding into policy debate. We've always said it isn't necessarily our role to argue for one scheme or the other, but to put the evidence on the table. And I think we are beginning to come up with clear evidence now. So we're doing everything we can to have an impact. And with that in mind, we're actually running a conference on the 30th of March, where Ministry of Justice officials will be coming to that conference, and we're flying in 2 experts from the States. And hopefully we'll have the Law Society and all the great and good amongst the stakeholders there as well. Because what we'd like people to do is to put their reservations on the table so that experts, two really experienced experts from the US, can talk through how they've managed. There is nothing that we can throw at those experts that they haven't already experienced, would be my view.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You said at the beginning that most common law jurisdictions have something like this, and the UK is or England and Wales are an outlier. What's your assessment as to why that is?
Interestingly, I think it's because of this judgment many years ago by the Judicial Committee of I think that's the reason why other common law jurisdictions have been so interested in it, if that's what you're asking. Because of this decision of the House of Lords that said this isn't lawyers' money, and it's probably unethical in some sense to be claiming it. And the Australians just took that and ran with it. Then the Canadians learnt from the Australians, the Americans learnt from the Canadians and the Australians.
When was that House of Lords judgment?
It was in 1960s.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a sector that's grown up since then.
Yes, absolutely.
And do all those jurisdictions also have legal aid provision of the kind that we would recognise here alongside their ILCA type systems?
It varies, as everything does vary. I have learned from scheme to scheme. So Texas, for instance, doesn't have any legal aid provision. But most schemes, especially in Canada and New Zealand and Australia, we would see that there is some legal aid provision. And actually in America, there are quite a lot of federal funds that come down for specific types of support that might be needed by disadvantaged people. So yes, it's mainly working alongside legal aid programs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Professor Mulcahy, thank you very much for that.
You
told us a lot in a little time. It got us off to a good start. I'm just going to suspend the sitting for 2 minutes while we change panels, but thank you for coming along this afternoon.
Thank you. I'd like to stay if that's okay.
Please. Session of the Justice Select Committee on access to justice. We now have assembled our very distinguished second panel, and I will allow them to very briefly introduce themselves. We'll start on my right with Dr. Phil Drake.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Dr. Phil Drake. I'm Director of the Justice Hub at the University of Manchester. The Justice Hub is a kind of umbrella term for all the clinical legal education pro bono services the university offers for the students. I'm also a former practicing solicitor before I came into academia. I'm an academic member of Garden Court North Chambers, and I'm also a board committee member of the Advice Services Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. And introduce yourselves in turn, that's fine.
Thanks, Andy. My name is Dr. Lisa Wintersteiger. I'm the CEO and founder of Advicenow. We were previously known as Law for Life. You might see some of our reports under that name. We provide the online legal support and advice service for England and Wales, covering civil, family and tribunal services. And I also have a background in academia, looking at more sort of theoretical issues around access to justice.
Thank you. My name is Liz Bayram. I'm Chief Executive of Advice UK, which is the largest network of independent advice services, 704 members today. And we basically are here to provide you with an insight on the diverse issues that our members are dealing with core themes around access to justice.
And I'm Dr. Nimrod Ben-Cnaan. I'm Head of Policy and Profile at the Law Centres Network. Law Centres Network is the national membership body for law centres. As a law centre, for those of you who aren't fortunate enough to have one in your constituency, is a law centre that is, a law practice that is a charity and not-for-profit. They specialise in social welfare law. They target their services largely for free at people living in disadvantage, and have been operating in this country for 6 decades now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for attending. We'll begin with some questions from Tessa Munt.
Thank you. I think my questions are directed probably at the two of you, Nimrod and Liz, if that's right. And what I wanted to do is just ask you, what are the most urgent areas of unmet legal need in England and Wales, and what needs to be addressed?
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think the largest challenge that our members have is the ability to provide ever-increasing complex advice support with a diminishing community of advisors and funding. And the diversity of the services that our members offer, they're dealing with debt, housing, right through to specialist areas around domestic violence and immigration. So there's quite a complexity of advice. I think when I talk about complex cases, what that means is that somebody presents with an issue, but actually underneath that there are lots of compounding factors. So the days of a simple piece of advice to help them fix a debt problem are gone, and the capacity for the advice workers to be able to deliver the quality of support that's needed within the environment they're operating in with increasing demand, reducing funds, is the biggest challenge they face.
Thank you. Do you want to add that, or is it?
Yes, please. Just to say that with a lot of the demand that we're seeing, certainly in law centres, I'm sure Liz would agree, it tends to be not one-off issues. They tend to be gateway problems that give you, open up, fan out, if you like, into complex problem clusters, and they tend to cluster around welfare rights issue, establishing people's entitlement to support, and we also see a great shortfall in supply of immigration legal assistance, about establishing a person's right to be in the UK and the kind of entitlements they are therefore able to access. I think probably a bottleneck that we're seeing from our perspective as specialist legal providers is precisely this: where when problems become contentious legal problems that involve a dispute that needs to be argued on behalf of your client, and they are sometimes unable, or feel unable anyway, to do that on their own and need to access specialist legal assistance.
Thank you very much indeed. And I just wondered whether you had a view on why there's clearly a need, why legal advice doesn't move in that direction to meet that need.
I went first last time.
The long and the short of it is that there is... I think there is a lot of unmet legal need, partly because there is a shortfall of capacity to meet it. That shortfall of capacity is down to a workforce issues that are systemic, and we can talk about those later. I hope we can. And the structure of resourcing and funding for the sector, not just in funding the core work, the direct assistance to people, but funding the infrastructure to enable more of it, including some which people can get on with on their own. For starters.
I think if I perhaps add to that, from our perspective, our members are reporting a 90% increase on demand for their services from a year or so ago. And I think some of that is the complexity of the systems around welfare benefits, changes around some of the immigration laws, all of the housing changes. So the system is becoming more complex. And for our members, alongside that, their funding is changing and it is reducing, reductions in local authority funding. We're really much aware now that most of our funding for our members is from charitable trusts and foundations, and that funding is often short-term and insecure. I think alongside that, which we've already echoed, is that cases are often more complex. We have clients arriving at services who've got zero budgets. They can't, even if it's all fixed, they still can't afford it. So some of the challenges are really complex, and underlying that there are issues around mental health conditions or other issues that connect them with other services. So we're very much focused on trying to show that complexity, and to certainly within that mix of poor funding, complex cases and increased demand, recognise that in the middle of that is a workforce that is increasingly hard to recruit and hard to keep, because their wages aren't great, their job security themselves isn't great. So there's a lot of complexity there that is codepending on how this is becoming more and more of a challenge.
Can I just ask you, do you feel there are changes if you look at sort of marginalised groups or the demographics of people who access your services?
So I think our member services are very diverse and really complex, so it's very hard to answer that. I think we're certainly very clear that for more specialist types of advice, working in particular areas or particular communities, their opportunities to secure funding are more challenging than more of the traditional generic advice around debt, for example. And there is very clear places to go for you to secure funding if you're a debt advisor, some of it government, but some of the more complex areas, and areas like immigration where those opportunities for funding are limited.
Thank you. And then, if I may, can I ask the two of you, just wondered how the average citizen identifies their problem as being a legal one, and what the barriers are that prevent people from accurately diagnosing their problems as legal problems.
Yeah, so you're right for me to... I suppose I'll just take a slight step back and just to emphasise that the issue of legal need, it might sound really obvious, but one of the driving factors of legal need is legislative activity. It presents the substantive problem that the public has to then address. And so you have this sort of it's somewhat of a kind of curve where both the most disadvantaged members of society, it's socially patterned, legal need is quite clear, that the most socially disadvantaged are likely to experience the most legal problems. Likewise, the most wealthy members of society will have lots of legal problems, but they can, of course, outsource their need to a legal service provider. So at the bottom end, we have a dual problem. Legal need also doesn't exist if someone has a reasonably decent level of legal capability. Up to a point, the more complex, the more difficult it is to resolve the problem. Again, the most socially disadvantaged have the lowest levels of legal capability. So you've got this combined problem of lots of problems, and the cluster's absolutely correct, as Nimrod said, in the lower sort of socio-economic demographic. Rather than 2 to 3 issues every two to 3 years, you see 4 to 6 issues appearing in parallel for the most disadvantaged. That's a huge challenge. In terms of problem identification, the vast majority of people don't identify legal problems per se. 45 or so think it's bad luck. 18 think it's bureaucratic problems. The last sort of several major studies show us that about 11% of people accurately spot their problems legal. That has obviously quite consequential impacts for where they go for help. Do they go to their doctor? Do they go to a lawyer? And again, what we know from problem identification or characterising a problem, it will affect whether or not you go to do anything at all or who you go to. But as a sort of iceberg problem, if we're thinking about the barriers, about 6 to 10% median global population-wise, about 12% go to lawyers with their problems. Most people don't. So they're handling their problems alone. So if you really want to sort of get at the absolutely vast scale of need that is not being met, some of your interventions really need to start thinking about the bottom-up challenge of, let's say, 45% of people are handling things on their own, consumer, housing, and so forth. How do you begin to move them into pathways that are better suited to their needs? And of course, that includes expert legal assistance along the way, but may very well be a sort of general advice service where if you don't spot your problem is legal, it doesn't particularly matter if you go to an advice agency because you just have a problem and they'll unpack it. if you have a very expert legal issue, you do need to know it has legal dimensions. So there's a kind of set of challenges around capability. Some of the barriers that our last set of research in legal needs showed were the kind of obvious things about language barriers, digital barriers, people really being left out of the system, but also the system itself creating barriers. One thing that lots of respondents told us was they were feeling they had repeatedly hostile and dismissive attitudes from public services. They were getting poor first instance decisions. There were delays and misinformation within the system. So there are personal barriers in terms of knowing about the law and what to do next, and there are systemic barriers, and those two together are creating a real sort of storm for people handling their problems.
And is there anything we can do to improve that capability?
Absolutely.
So what should be done?
Absolutely. I think a really useful report is the November report by the OECD. There's a real shift in thinking of that kind of iceberg problem. How do you ensure a range of interventions is supporting capability? That can be expert advice, but it can just be particularly digital service. Tech has been one of our few new opportunities in a decade. Again, you have to segment according to your problem. Is it a family? Is it a housing problem? You have to segment according to the population group. You can't just get at everybody. You're looking at maternity services. You're looking at young people leaving schools, so that you're beginning to target where they need to know something when they need to know it better. That then helps you with your pathways. What we found in our sort of work on intermediaries is most people are going not to advice sectors anymore because there's so little there. They're going to their nurses, they're going to their doctors, they're going to their faith groups. So again, there's a partnership challenge of building capacity in our intermediary cohorts. They want it, they want training and support so that they can better help people along that journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thinking about the legal advice sector in the round, how would you say the sector has changed in the last few years in terms of new entrants, new kind of providers? I'm also thinking of people who say, I hear you've been in an accident, phone this number, I can help you.
Chasers,
yes. So could you characterise for us how the sector has changed over the last couple of decades?
Such a good question, isn't it? I think I'm certainly from the independent advice sector, which I know lots about. I don't know so much about some of those other areas. We are well aware that the sector has evolved in terms of its ability to network and partnership collaboratively together to deliver services. And that's partly because being funded on your own is harder and harder to do. So that ability to collaborate and to innovate together is really working in some areas, and we can talk about the networks of advice in Bristol and Manchester and other places where that's really working well and supporting individuals to be pointed at the right place. I think there's other areas of advice when I look across the borders to Scotland where there's much more innovation in terms of government driving the ability to help people wherever they appear with their problems. So in Glasgow there's a project working which is called No Wrong Door. So wherever you start and mention your problem, you're looked after. So it doesn't matter if you go to the doctor first or you go to, the local school where your kid's dropped off. There's still that network that the community moves you to where you need to be. So I think for me, the opportunities around outreach working and much more collaboration, as Isra said, in terms of partnerships, that's where I've seen the innovation. I think most of the communities that our members look after are the individuals that don't have legal insurance, they don't own their own home. So there really are that hard end of disadvantage. So those opportunities to work with some of those other businesses.
Is there a similar scheme in Wales?
So there are examples of that in Wales. I think the thing we're most jealous about in Wales is its nationwide advice strategy, which hopefully at some point we will touch on in terms of that collaborative government approach.
Does that nationwide advice strategy in Wales cover the corporate providers?
No, it's very much about the voluntary sector the communities at most at disadvantage. Okay. For us in England, one of the challenges for advice is it doesn't belong in any one department. It touches lots of different parts of government, and therefore when you look to try and work with government to improve things, it's very hard to know who owns it, where it starts. Whereas I think for us an ambition to look at whether we could have a national advice funding strategy for England and learn from the experiences of nations would be a really positive opportunity to talk about.
Of course, lots of people come to their MPs, as I'm sure we can all testify.
Yes.
Would anyone else like to add something on the changing shape of the mixed economy?
Phil, do you want?
Yeah. Going back to your phone calls that you mentioned, someone would say, hey, you've been involved in an accident.
Yes.
I mean, you will know from being personal injury that conditional fee agreements have been, to a degree, of success in enabling people to be able to access solicitors and get representation. One of the big pressures on the personal injury firms now is the change in the small claims limit to injuries, which has meant that it's far, far more difficult for personal injury firms to make money out of personal injury claims as they could have done before. And you effectively put people in the hands of insurers to do the right thing and make sure, the people get the compensation that's appropriate and that they deserve. So it's probably a lot of personal injury firms are struggling as a consequence of that and having to redirect what their specialisms are into other areas which are more profitable.
We know there's a rise in those who are either employed or self-employed, seeking access to free generalist or legal advice. Has there been much research done around that?
Not that I'm aware of. We did, however, run an interesting bit of research 6 years ago now. So in 2020, law centres have had their 50th anniversary of the first law centre, and for that we produced a report that looked at what we call the justice gap. That is, if you're not eligible for legal aid because you're above the means threshold, but you can't afford to pay for it outright, how affordable is legal assistance to you? And at the time we found that overall, of all earners, be they self-employed or salaried, were caught in the justice gap. And this, of course, varied considerably depending on their family situation. So if 76% of single parents with just one child were in primary school, were already caught in the justice gap, where finding the money for legal assistance would mean they would need to cut back on essentials. And it varies again depending on how many children you have, whether you're single or a dual parent household, and how old the children are, all of that. And it's basically we're looking at a rather stark picture where if you're not eligible for legal aid, then remember, legal aid doesn't cover all problems, of course. So in some areas, for example, in employment law, none of us are eligible for legal aid because there isn't legal aid for it. It's quite a sobering picture.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Any member of the panel, feel free to answer. Frequently attendees at generalist or legal advice services are referred on to receive legal expertise and representation. To what extent are those referrals successful, and what happens to those which are not successful?
Well, I could speak for one particular area, which is private family. We provide services for our page users, about 350,000 page users per annum. That's about 200,000 users. Pretty large part of what's been lost from legal aid. And so what we find is we are trying very, very hard to fill the gaps. But so just again referring to our recent research, which was with Central England Law Centre, that the largest in the country, they do have some family provision. A community member has a family problem, they, if they're lucky, may get to some element of supply of what's within scope in family. Ordinarily, though, if they've got a private family matter, they will immediately ping out of scope, will not be covered by the service, and so they're then, referred back over to us as a digital provider. We can do a fair bit, and we have 19, panel lawyers who are assisting. But again, questions of scope and then availability in relation to advice visits means that depending on your subject matter, there is a slightly invidious bouncing around, referral fatigue, lack of clarity of pathways. So it is a little bit of a lottery. I'm sure that's not new to the committee, and it would look slightly different for different areas. But the bottom line, the supply is far too limited for the amount of need, if it's in scope at all.
Any other comments on that?
Could I just ask you to repeat the question? I missed some of it first time round.
Yeah, sure. So frequently attendees for legal advice or generalist advice services are referred to receive legal representation. So to what extent are those referrals successful, and what happens to those which are not successful?
Good question. I mean, I think one of the problems that we, working in policy and advocacy in the sector following LASPO, following the Legal Aid Act of 2013, is that it's been difficult capturing where people went when there was no legal aid anymore. We can say there are some things that we do know for sure. So, for example, there is a national survey, quite a large sample size, run by the Legal Services Board, so it's a public body, not the sector, saying that basically about a third of all civil legal need runs unmet. So it's not a minor thing. It's not a marginal sort of picture. This is quite at the vanguard of people's experience. And, you know, where they go, I mean, I can give you an example from one of our larger regional law centre. That also illustrates another thing, which is the slowly increasing demand that is also increasingly unmet. So between 2023 and 2025, they've had an increase of 23% in people inquiring, an increase of 25% in the actual inquiries, because of course people have more than one problem they need to get help with. In terms of people being turned away, we're looking at an increase of 10.5%. And that's with all the taps turned on as much as possible. And it's a real struggle partly because of the advice desert structure that we're seeing now. If a law centre can't pick up a legal case, and in some practice areas the shortage is more acute than in others, there may not be another provider for several counties over.
Okay, thank you. Moving on slightly from that then, so what are the main drivers of recruitment and retention challenges among the generalist and legal advice providers? Maybe Liz?
Yeah, and I would recognise that part of the evidence I've got is thanks to the work we're doing with the Advice Workforce Development Fund that's been very much focused on looking at the challenges within London, but there are a lot of learnings from that as well. And it won't surprise you that for many individuals looking to join the advice workforce, it's not attractive in terms of salary. The challenges around short-term contracts and fixed-term contracts, again, are not attractive. And I think what we also are aware of from the work that we've done within the sector and within the work we've done with the Advice Workforce Development Fund is that once in as an entry point within the sector, it's really hard to see how you progress and move forward. So all of these things make it less attractive. I think if you have a legal degree, a law degree, then there's many other avenues and pathways that are more opportune for you in the future. And I think really for the organisations that we talk to, there's complexity in terms of how they support and retain staff within those challenges. The work itself is stressful and hard. These cases are complex and difficult. And often people seeking advice from an advice service leave it till it's got really bad before they come, and there's lots of emotional reasons why that might be the case. And ultimately, alongside of that, really, it's fixed-term short contracts because the funding isn't longer term. The opportunities for more sustainable ways of delivering services, and I reference back to the previous session, opportunities for more sustainable funding through collective action, and some of those are things, are real opportunities for enabling the workforce to be more stable and to recruit and retain people. I think one of the things I'd finally add is that for many of our members, They are coming up with quite innovative ways to do it within their local communities, and there's a strong process between people who have used the service with lived experience, then joining as volunteers, and then moving in. But I think the challenge of how you progress beyond that, and some of the worst stories that I have as a advice network, is those members that have closed because their founder and their leader has gone, and there isn't anybody to take over. So it's that longevity of career and making sure that those skills and expertise remain in the sector that is the big challenge.
For us in law centres, it's at LCN, the Law Centres Network, workforce development is really a key priority because of the obvious urgency of it. I would say with law centres, we don't struggle to attract people, we struggle to keep them. And we struggle to keep them partly because of, well, I would say this. At early career level, interest levels are strong. Last summer we ran a recruitment round for 8 paid internships and got over 200 applications. So really, the interest is there. I think people struggle with career progression. They struggle with the cost of living compared with the kind of salaries that we're able to pay. I would say even in better provided areas, such as a large conurbation like London, the struggle is real. I mean, I've just, one of our larger law centres in London lost within the last 18 months, 3 solicitors and 2 paralegals, and that's in the city that should be, and in a place and in the kind of vocation that should be attractive to the people, and it is. But often people leave because, they can't afford to live in London on a legal aid solicitor salary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's been one good scheme that's been getting more social welfare solicitors qualified. The Social Welfare Solicitors Qualifying Fund, which Patrick McCann set up, and money from the large global international firms have been contributing in towards this fund to assist people who are working as paralegals in law centres to be able to qualify as solicitors. But again, you hit that ceiling. Once they actually qualify, then there's nowhere really for them to go from that.
So just to push back a little bit on that then. So what's the solution? What should the government be doing?
Where to start? I think that there's several things there. One that I'd like to point out is this. The government recently launched its apprenticeship funding reform, which includes removing levy support for level 7 apprenticeships for anyone over 22, I should say. And to us, we see that as something that undermines our ability to train and to offer people progression, because often we find it better to train people already working in law centres, looking to qualify and move into that. And it is more manageable for law centres quite considerably to manage the cost of that as well. And it also overlooks the fact that a lot of entrants into the sector come in mid-career. And it overlooks the fact that we are in a world of work in which we will, most of us, need to retrain at least once. And so capping the level 7 apprenticeship levy support at age 21 misses a great human wealth that we could be really tapping into. So that was one easy win that we did ask of government, but was not taken up this time. I hope they come around to it.
If I can build on the apprenticeship theme, I think one of the things that we're really clear is important is to work with government on basically a career pathway and workforce strategy for the advice sector. And that really does start with some of the entry levels as well. There isn't an apprenticeship for advice and all the facets of great stuff that goes along with that. And we have seen in other sectors, in early years, in teaching, there's opportunities to grow a professional pathway for people, and it really does start with the apprenticeship opportunity and having something that's tailored and dedicated. And as Nimrod has said, then building into those career pathways to move forward. There are opportunities, I think, just to really work harder at school career advice and at job centre advice about what an advice career is. Those conversations aren't being had. Most of the people that join the advice sector, as I've said, join because they've used it or they hadn't thought about it and they stumble across it. So I think there's lots that could be done to just elevate and help people understand that. We've talked a lot about how hard work and depressing it is, but actually it's a place where we know from our members the opportunity to make a difference and to support people is a really positive attribute to the job.
Just to add on that very quickly, the diversity of the advice sector is one of its greatest strengths. It is truly a reflection of its community, and when it is, there's better outcomes all around. The legal professions have some way to progress in improving diversity. Schemes such as the social welfare fund that was mentioned earlier is a good support for that, and so that's another priority for us, to be able to really reflect the community, the variety of age groups, everything that could help make for a better, more accessible service.
One of the aspects of diversity from our membership community that's important to realise is that many of them are quite small, so if they lose one of their two advisors, it's very challenging. One of the things we hear from our members is that in order to support apprenticeships and support those career pathways, we need to also think about how the individuals who are managing those new entrants are given support with supervision, are given backup for when those individuals aren't trained. So it's looking at the apprenticeship in the round and recognising for very small organisations, just having an apprenticeship without that recognition of the time and capacity to support them to do that well needs to be supported too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lindsay.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fildrake, you mentioned small claims litigation earlier, and I want to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit more about that, particularly in the context of the impact of regulation on access to justice. And I'm aware that you have previously argued that removing small claims track litigation as a reserved legal activity would allow advice agencies to provide greater support to the public. So to what extent does regulation, particularly rules around reserved legal activities, affect the ability of citizens to enforce their rights?
Yeah, I mean, the small claims limit is currently £10,000 for kind of property disputes. Under Section 12 of the Legal Services Act 2007, any form of litigation comes as reserved legal activity, which you have to be a regulated firm to get involved in representing somebody around that area. It's applied to multi-track claims, fast-track claims, which it rightly does so, but it's also applied to small claims track, which essentially is supposedly for individuals to be able to represent themselves. The whole system is very complex, and individuals find it very difficult to draft claim forms, draft defences, draft witness statements. And because it's reserved activity, as a legal advice centre, we can't assist our clients in draft. We can tell them what they need to put in, but they have to draft it themselves, and we can't represent them. Under the small claims, part 27, I think it's paragraph 3.2 of the practice directions, you can have a lawyer or a layperson represent you in a hearing, but you can't have them drafting the documents beforehand. So essentially, you go into a hearing and an individual really doesn't know what's important to the court. I find with most of the clients we work with, what they think is important, and my research area as kind of reinforces, is that what the clients think is important is not at all relevant to the legal case, and what's relevant to the legal case, the clients haven't even picked up on. So you've then got the clients going into a dispute with what tends to be, if it's say a consumer contract issue, with a big organisation who can instruct a solicitor to represent their views. Even with smaller organisations, they're more used to dealing with litigation, and you've got an individual who's got absolutely no idea and can't get representation from a university legal advice clinic to be able to take them from the start of the claim right through to the very end of the claim because of the restrictions from the Legal Services Act. So my argument is it's rightly imposed for fast-track and multi-track claims, but it has no... there's no real logic why it's being imposed in relation to small claims track claims. And if this was removed so that small claims track cases, you could draft documents, you can draft defences, you can draft claim forms, it would provide a lot greater assistance to members of the public who really do struggle, going back to what you were saying about, you know, the people who really at who having the difficulties really find it difficult to understand the legal nature. And I mean, the same law applies in small claims court as it does in the multi-track and the fast track. So you've got to know the law of contract, you've got to know the law of negligence. So it's in my view, a small claims track has to be allowed, that people could either lay representation or actually like university legal advice centres who can actually... Many are supervised by solicitors. It's not in our interest really to go down a regulated route as a university, but we could, through supervision, provide, you know, proper assistance and proper representation to individuals where they're not facing, you know, a solicitor from a big organisation when they've got a consumer issue.
And the circumstance that you've just described clearly sounds to me like a barrier to access to justice, but also a bit of a blocker for the efficiency of the court as well?
Absolutely. When litigants in person go into court, again, what they believe is the most important issue isn't relevant to the legal case. And it takes a judge. I mean, we work in an adversarial system of law. Now, a judge is supposed to sit back and let the two parties, for want of a better word, fight it out, you know, legally. Well, if you've got one person who's represented by a solicitor for a big company, you've got an individual consumer who's not got any representation, then the judge has to either ignore the fact that they're a litigant in person or try and advise the relevant legal facts, which comes into a kind of quasi like the European system, which is hard for judges. And what cases when lawyers are involved can be dealt with in 10, 20 minutes, result in 40, 50 minutes to the judicial system, and the case is backing up from those problems.
Which is also a barrier to access to justice when there's backlogs.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want me to go on or to the next question, which is
on
to
this?
Lisa?
I'll let you carry on.
Finish what you're doing.
After you.
Thank you. My next question is to Dr. Lisa Wintersteiger. It's relating to service delivery models. And I was just wondering how organisations which provide legal advice and low-cost legal representation, how are they innovating their service delivery models?
Right, thanks. I'm going to do again, be very annoying and slightly circle back because it relates to this to the example I'll give you. One of the things we lost in 2012 was the Legal Services Research Centre. It was a world-leading research centre that gave us some of the most important data sets that we've not had repeated since. But one of the things that happens when people can't get the help that they need, right, the impact of unmet legal need is really one of the numbers you want to be looking for. In 2006, the number that Pasco Pleasance came up with, who was leading the research centre, was around about £3.7 billion a year is the cost of unmet legal need in this country. That's 206. Canada's since run some aggregated models. Just Health disaggregated alone $75 million of impact. So that's your sort of starting point. What we've done with the problem is you've got a far too little supply, far too large a demand. How do you begin to unpack some of that? So one of our sort of solutions, it is imperfect but interesting. In the private family space, we have a very large cohort of people who come. Some of them use that information. They're all litigants in person, to be clear. They're coming into the family court system with private family issues. Most of them are using a range of digital support mechanisms. But plainly within that complex journey, particularly family and financial arrangement matters, complex stuff, they hit a point where we would say it's a pain point, where you just can't go any further unless you have that bit of assistance. Not, traditional end-to-end service, because you simply can't afford it. So what we designed with Resolution, who are wonderful partners in that innovation track, is looking at the pain points, about 50 in the journey. I'm sure there's more in an ideal world. You'd have a solicitor all the way through, where they then move from our digital system. They've read lots and lots of that content. They've used what we have. And then they have a seamless transition to one of the 19 panel solicitors who has a significant amount of preemptory information about the case, who will then assist the client on the basis of an hour. The fee is fixed. It is fixed at £120 an hour. That is about 70% less than market rates. The results are proving to be fantastic for users. Of course, if they could afford the whole thing, they would. But we're seeing, what particularly we're seeing is that they're able to act. They feel more confident when they then have to move into the court situation and address their problem alone, because they will later be alone. And they feel that they're more able to put in place the steps that they've discovered through our content. So it's that kind of unbundled mixed model that we really couldn't have had in the past because we didn't have the tech to do it. What we would want to see is an expansion of that kind of example. One of the big barriers is 120 is still 120 too much for some users. We have a voucher scheme supporting mediation. We would want to see some sort of assistance for that 2-hour provision, along with free digital, that gets people through the system. It is a nice way of thinking about scale, getting that kind of full panoply of assistance, but making sure those really difficult moments can be addressed. And you've got independent help at that moment. It is still less than ideal, so I don't want to oversell, but for us it's a real opportunity to expand. We've done some solid research on the findings. We're really delighted, but we are now finding that the government's position on either free or paid for advice has developed a sort of Rubicon. So our digital service is supported to some extent by government, by the Ministry of Justice. The fee provision part is really at the whim and the willingness of family law firms to step in and support. So that's a really nice kind of opportunity to test and try and scale.
And can you see a pathway to that? The testing, trialling, the scale?
Definitely. The lawyers are asking, they say that, the clients are saying, we can afford 120, but no more. Some people are still left out, so we'd want to see some underwriting. Lawyers are saying they can do it. They can't overburden their wider commercial cases because from their perspective, it's better than pro bono because the client is supported through the journey. They circle back round to us and go through litigation if they go that far. Or, in fact, in an ideal, they avoid the litigation because they decide we're going to settle. That's what you want, really, isn't it? So we need to underwrite those that can't afford, and we need to support the lawyers who are being onboarded. In 2 years, we've onboarded the 19 lawyers. Appointments are up to about 450 per annum. The demand is still too high, so we just need to kind of build and scale. Investment is actually quite low, but we need to see these mixed models as being a real opportunity to meet the need for low-income families who need some advice but cannot afford, high street rates.
Thank you so much.
Did you want to go in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Dr. Drake, for explaining so well the problems that exist with the small claims track. Isn't the big inconsistency that having small claims track litigation as reserved legal activity means that solicitors aren't going to want to take on the case because they're not going to get paid?
They don't get paid anyway to a degree in a small claims track. It's fixed costs. So even if you've got a £4,000 dispute, it's quite uneconomical to instruct a solicitor to be able to advise you because their costs can, exceed 2,000, whatever, and that's going to come out of the claim. It's not going to be paid by the other side in relation to the cost. So, the position in the small claims track is solicitors don't really want to become involved in any event, which is what you said.
Yeah. So I don't know Have you ever thought about removing the small claims track altogether? Would you ever advocate getting rid of the small claims track? Do you think that might be a way forward?
I don't think it will allow more people to access justice if you remove the small claims track, because there are people who have some legal knowledge who can access, the small claims track. I think it could be simplified. I think it's very, very complex, and as a lot of cases, the same burden is on a litigant in person as there is in relation to a legal professional, which is ridiculous when somebody's qualified, experienced, able to works in this every day, and you've got somebody who's just come to it completely. But I don't think we should get rid of a small claims track. I think it was a bit of a backward step when the personal injury £5,000 was introduced, because that meant a lot of solicitors wouldn't get involved anymore with regards to conditional fee agreements. In relation to property, I think it's a good thing that it is a small claims track, because the problem as well is if you take on a case, if you're taking on a company, if you lose, you would essentially have to pay their costs, which is not a kind of threat that individuals have to work against in small claims track litigation. So I think on balance it's good, but it's so complex. It's so complex. I mean, there's clients who come to see us, and it's probably going back to an earlier question as well, is they come to us with one problem, and when you speak to them, that's not your legal problem. This is what your legal problem is. And if they can't even identify the legal problem, how on earth are they going to pursue a claim form, draft particulars of claim in relation against a big company who are going to have their solicitors defending the matter?
Yeah, and as you said, judges trying to take the case through with a litigant in person takes longer, and therefore it adds to the court delays.
Yeah, and I mean, it's as I was mentioned previously, the problem is we're working in an adversarial system. So where a judge has to take sides and try and advise a litigant in person, they're no longer impartial to a degree. I know a lot of lawyers sometimes complain about that. So it's almost like a quasi-inquisitorial system, the judges. And what could take an hour, 2-hour hearing is double without a lawyer on one of the sides. It's just taking up all the court's process, and the judges are having to try and explain what legal matters are important, because the individuals who are involved are just quite frankly lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessa.
Thank you very much indeed. So there are people in the community, so people like health workers, and there are some groups, and dare I say it, MPs, maybe, who might be trusted, and are certainly points of contact for members of the public, and can I certainly know that my team is absolutely crucial in identifying what's underneath the original complaint that comes into our office, or the concern that somebody raises, and very often we need to direct people into the legal system, or to identify and help them get through that. And I just wondered whether there are reforms or investment that could embed those intermediaries' roles more systematically across some of our public services, and whether you had a view about that. I don't know. Go on then, have a
First come, first serve.
Go on then.
So I think some of the areas of policy focus at the moment around better start, health hubs, the health strategy, it's already embedding advice within there, and we are well aware of some of our members' innovation in terms of their outreach work, and working in doctors' surgeries and taking their advice to the school gate. All of those things are really working well.
Yeah, I live in a very rural area.
Yes. So I think there's also, as we said, that challenge of advice deserts, and where you can and can't access information and support. I think that the service of advice is a mixed model. It's outreach, it's phone, it's digital, it's all of those things. But I think what I was trying to show was that the ability to connect, and a community-based advice service knows its intermediaries, knows its networks, to be able to build those relationships as well. So I think there's lots of good practice there to build on.
So what should the government do to embed that sort of support more fully into, you know, there are health justice partnerships and various other bits and pieces. What does the government need to do? Go on, far away.
I'll throw a couple.
Yeah,
what the intermediaries who are actually doing the work, whether they're health providers or wider community groups, are saying they are being hit by the need. They are not legally trained. They're asking for elements of training, which is their priority. So they need free assistance to support their capacity. Number one ask. So they said, we don't be trained as lawyers, but we need to better understand this legal problem that is coming at us at speed. They want improved referral pathways. That means a mixed model. Some of them said co-location is brilliant. The food bank said to us, for example, please just pop somebody in here. Others said, we don't need somebody in here. We want a dedicated phone line by our local advice agency. So if I've got somebody with this housing issue, I know it's Sheila I call. They're asking for better digital support so that they can, you know, assist, because they are doing the digital work, but they're doing it with a real challenge on their hands. On the one side, they want better and more targeted legal information on the topics at hand for them, housing, social care, what have you. They are also, and this is a wider digital barriers challenge, but it is absolutely right, if they are sitting and assisting somebody with a DWP problem, with a housing problem, they are acting as the digital bridge. They are asking for it's much the same as the person who has also got a barrier to get through the digital system. They're saying, I can assist this person, but if I need to call somebody, I need to call somebody. Why have we been given an absolutely digital by default and only digital system when we are here as community intermediaries, nurses and so on, trying to assist the person? So they're asking for alternative pathways, reasonable alternative to digital pathways to provide the assistance that's there, and some infrastructure support to do what they do better. The final thing they've asked for, and it's part of that training model, is they are doing the assistance, but there is anxiety, and it relates to the regulatory point that they don't want to go too far. They do not want to be lawyers. They want to help fill forms, they want to help make the telephone calls when needed, and they want to know where they need to stop and make the correct referral to the right person at the right time. They're all relatively doable investment support capacity needs to make the best of what's there.
And I'm going to bring it down a bit. I think that a lot of advice services are really keen to do that and are innovating, but it's back to the issues we talked about before. Growing demand, not enough capacity to meet those needs. So often we hear from our members that they're doing triage, they're trying to look at ways in which they can support intermediaries, help people to self-serve so that the more complex cases that can't be dealt with in that way are moving forward. So it's something that many advice services, they want to do that, but it doesn't work if they haven't got that core capacity and funding.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing is identifying the people in the front line of the people getting into the public coming to them and saying, look, we've got this problem, and they're getting the same people coming up with the same problem. So what we've worked with frontline agencies is to try to empower the people dealing with the public, to give them some legal knowledge of what the position is, give guidance so that they understand some of the law around the area, particularly like housing, you know, and landlord and tenant issues. And also what we have been doing is giving guidance with them, working with them so that the guidance is the community can get hold of this guidance and try and understand what their position is. It's maybe not as detailed as what we're giving the frontline agencies, but that way we're trying to... These people are on the front line dealing with people coming in all the time with very similar problems, and they are scared, you know, of getting the law wrong, and the law changes so quickly in a lot of the areas which impact on the least privileged, you know, and it's so complex. It at least gives them some idea to be able to give advice and assist individuals that way.
Go on then, might as well have all four, really quickly.
Very quickly, because you mentioned health justice partnerships, and law centres run several across the country, and they're quite interesting in that health justice partnerships are not a new invention, and they've been available mostly through primary care settings, GP practices, that sort, for years and years. Diversifying that beyond primary care practices and into specialist care, into hospitals, reducing bed blocking, all sorts of interesting challenges that the system is facing. could really is something that we're better documenting the effect of, and yet I think systemically there is a barrier in that every integrated care board makes its own priorities and could use perhaps a steer, if not more guidance directly, as to how to get into such partnerships. That would be useful, because I know from the advice side of such a partnerships, it's often very difficult to make inroads into healthcare in order to establish that kind of relationship, and it's always on a local or regional basis rather than something that you could, copy off of a national framework. So more of that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We're going to go on in a second to our last section, which is on digitalisation. But I'm just going to, very unfairly, ask you to give me a quick answer on funding. Given what you heard earlier on from Linda Mulcahy, where would you say, from all your years of experience, are the main areas of deficiency at the moment in terms of funding? Where are the areas where? And have you any ideas where that funding might come from? 30 seconds.
I'll
30 seconds each.
30 seconds. So digital innovation has been stymied through lack of capital investment. Shocking. If I get a bit from my philanthropist, I'm lucky. It is the place where scale can start to be met. Where should it come from? I'm rather disappointed that law tech funding has not made its way through to our sector. There have been pots, they've not been large, but they would make a huge difference. I would really ask a consideration of that next round of law tech. I know the Minister is keen to get to the access to justice sector so that we can get on with our R&D and meet the need that's out there.
I think apart from more, which is always the case, I think from our members, the sustainability of that funding and the fragmentation of it is the challenge. I think if there was one thing that we would really like to see is that across government departments, advice is funded in different ways in different places, and the opportunity to build on some of the work that other nations are doing. You might get more value for that money if you look at it in a more strategic sense around how that advice is being funded. In terms of digitisation, we are lucky in some areas of advice, around debt advice, where we are getting funding from MAPS for innovation and modernisation of funding. That's helping some of our advice services start to use AI, which isn't, robots talking to clients. It's helping them save time and energy so they can focus more on the quality interactions with clients. And I think that review of how funding works and thinking about ways in which it builds more encouragement into innovation for other sectors that aren't able to build to scale in that way that we are managing to do because of that MAPS funding commitment. So learning from what we're doing and doing it better in other areas.
I would argue with, I would definitely agree with much of what's been said here. I would just, probably we need to bring this back into the discussion because it's often overlooked. We're looking at, firstly, it's work that is, access to justice is a public good. And it should be treated as public infrastructure and funded accordingly. And there should be, and this is something that we've included in our written submission as well, an access to justice strategy that goes well beyond legal aid as we have now, all existing commitments, but really looking at, seriously, at what we are looking to provide, how we are going to go about creating some sort of roadmap.
You're saying the government should do this, MOJ should do this, should map out how access to justice goes across the piece.
Yes, but it's a wider government responsibility, as we've just said about, for example, the intersection with health, and there are several other intersections across other government portfolios. Obviously, MOJ should be helming that. And I think we also need to remember that for the most part, the kind of services that we're talking about are fundamentally non-commercial work. So this is not, so we're not just non-commercial providers, the charities in the advice sector, but we, if this is not work that would find in the main commercial providers, clients would not necessarily be able to afford to pay for it, and we need to work based on those assumptions in order to create something that is sufficient, I would say, but also stable, because along with funding, one of the things that the sector has struggled with over the years is policy instability, be it direct justice policy and policies in other portfolios that affected the drove demand to law centres, to advice agencies. And, we need to systematize that kind of thinking. And, sure enough, all the resources are not already there before us, but a roadmap would be really useful in that, you're committing to putting in place resources by a certain point in time. We've talked enough about additional funding sources in the previous session with Professor Mulcahy, which I think should be listened to very carefully, because I think there's some great ideas there. I think we, by now, following several years of the review of civil legal aid, the work of the previous Justice Committee, the work of the National Audit Office, the work of the Public Accounts Committee, all of this in the space of, 2 or 3 years. We have enough knowledge of where we need to go. We need to just seize the bull by the horns.
Okay, thank you very much. If we digging down a bit into digitalisation, you just mentioned the Public Accounts Committee, who did a very recent report that said that about a quarter of the people seeking advice were digitally excluded. So what do you think are the problems with accessing advice online, and what more can government or anyone else do to deal with that?
Do you want me to leap in? Yeah. So, and we've done some evolving work with the OPRC on this. We know there's a kind of digital-first transition that we are all having to address. Court reforms have gone down the same road. It is clear that some people are not able to use services at all. Some people simply lack some degree of the digital skills they need. So what some of the strategy is about conjoining your pathways to the assistants, whether they are an advice worker, they're doing that every day, or whether it's a social prescriber doing that work. Those elements of assistance to the public have to be there. Those assisting people need not just one digital pathway, they need an alternative one. But I think what we're seeing from what is now sadly not our research in the UK, because we've lost those wonderful people who were at the Legal Services Research Centre but have gone off to Australia and other jurisdictions, is that if you're thinking about digital capability, you have to think about digital and legal capability together. So and we work very closely with HMCTS colleagues, that's fantastic, as we do with the OPRC, you can, and it was partly my point about promulgation of law, you have to make less complex the law that's coming to the citizens, especially if you're going to use online systems for it. What you design has to be much less complicated, much more accessible, and it has to not just know how they click through a system of forms, let's say for a civil claim, but also what do they need to know about that civil claim process as a legal element in order to progress that themselves. So there are things we do know how to do it better. They are not being implemented at the moment, unfortunately.
I don't know if I could...
Yes. Do Phil.
Yeah, I would like to say gov.uk is a fantastic source for information that's out there on the website. It is pitched quite high, though. For people who are qualified, have experience in the law, it's really, really helpful and really, really useful. But people who don't have that experience, don't have that qualifications, can struggle to circumnavigate it. So that's something that perhaps could be done to make it more accessible, gov.uk. Can I just quickly mention about funding, just because it was a point raised previously? And the rule of law is a principle that most law firms, solicitors, barristers would agree as important. There's so many people who don't have access to the law. because, you know, they just cannot access advice. 38%, I think, of people don't get any legal help with regards to their legal problem. Law Works said in a report last time. There's been discussion previously about a levy on the big law firms who are, you know, international, and whether they could perhaps contribute more towards the free legal advice sector. The one thing I think the Social Welfare Solicitors Qualifying Fund showed is that there is an appetite for some of the big firms to actually contribute and pay some money into a fund to assist in having new solicitors qualifying through. Whether that could be extended, you know, to free a pot going in for free legal advice where people could bid, you know, for how they would use it and recruit more members to get involved in it. That's just something I wanted to mention as well.
Thank you.
Yes. My point was almost to turn it on its head. I don't want us to just think about digitisation in terms of the individuals needing access to justice. It's also about how the services supporting them through support can develop their technical skills and ability, and some of our members are already using AI to help them reduce their administrative workload, to help them with triage, to help them with initial recommendations on next steps for client, all of which means the advisor has less time spent typing up notes and thinking about paperwork and more time with the client. So that's another aspect of it that I think the committee would be good to consider.
Thank you very much. Winda.
Yeah, question for you, Dr. Wintersteiger. So talking about accessing online information, I mean, those who are unable to afford access to specialist advice are going to go to digital legal information and automated consumer tools. And for those who have low legal capability, how effective are these tools for them to be able to recognise their legal problems and actually get that advice so that they can take appropriate action?
It's a design principle. Some of them are not very effective at all, and some of them are. So just going back to a point I made earlier about problem recognition, most people don't know their problem is legal. That, for long studies, has not been a feature as a barrier for the advice sector, because people just have a problem. They go to their local advice agency. To a certain extent, a similar principle is deployed on online design. So Advicenow has a very, very high cohort of post-disabled users, people from BME backgrounds, many people helping somebody else with the system. But your design principle is focused, and it's what I would say to government about its design principles. The OECD is saying to governments about design principles. You start with the lowest levels of legal capability. You assume every user has the lowest levels. They know nothing. They probably don't know their problem is legal, and you're walking them through that. And they probably have a lot of skill deficits. So, for example, you can do an awful lot with very, very, very well-designed step-by-step content. What you can't do is address the skills deficit that often people have. In that space, you would be looking at things like either video work or document processing tools. So we do lots and not thousands of people come to us to get their appeal or their MR considered because they can't write a letter and they can't access an advice agency to do so. So it's you're starting at the lowest, because those who are the most capable, who are using our digital system, are already able to get through the simple stuff, and they still glean a lot. The other absolutely key element is we know for us it's about 15 to 20% of users are assisting somebody else, and you begin to design around the assisting principles. So we're building, the MOJ has helped us with designing user accounts where your community nurse who's logging into our system is regularly able to deal with multiple people with multiple problems and knows where to go next, particularly with clusters. But it is the starting point of recognising most people don't have high capability. They do struggle, and some can't get on at all. And you must build a bridge to your community support in order to do that.
So you've said that some of these tools are not effective at all. So
yeah, I would say so. And I would say most... Can I say this? Yes, I can say this. Most of them are the ones that are designed by legal institutions, because they still start with the lawyer at the centre of the design principle. We would say for years, we have wonderful colleagues at HMCDS and the regulators, but it is a real problem. Let's take an example. Legal Choices. It's a pretty large platform. A lot of money's gone into Legal Choices for some time, and it was on the back of the Legal Services Act, was it not, to make sure the public understood? Well, first of all, if you understood legal need and legal capability, you know that giving people a choice to find their lawyer isn't really going to tackle the problem that you've got in terms of the scale of legal need, because they can't afford a lawyer. And what they need to know is more about their problem and how to get through it. So it's an example of not starting where the user is, and it is the message coming out of most, advancing jurisdictions. If you are not thinking about user-centred design, whether it's the court or the grassroots level, you're going to get it wrong, and you're going to waste an awful lot of money and create an awful lot of barriers. So there are lots of digital services that are very loyally, like court documents, which nobody can understand unless they're a lawyer. It's got to be flipped. What does a person need to know and be able to do, crucially, to get through that next stage?
I mean, we're talking about vulnerable people and people with low legal capability who are in need of help. So what more should we be doing to safeguard these people from misinformation?
That's a very good starting point for a question, because the other impacts we talked about, the 3.7 billion health service, loss of home, breakdown in relationships. It costs us, costs the public person, individuals. It costs us in trust. We're seeing such decline in trust in institutions and government. I do think, and I think it's a message from our Nuffield recent partnership, and it's a group of both law centres, ourselves as digital and university providers, saying you must have an ecosystem. You can't just put money in one direction. You've got to build digital. You've got to build and support advice agencies. You need specialist providers, and you need your trusted community bridges. And you have to build those together from the bottom up, because you're losing people. I think for me, the most striking part of the work in the community when we did a deep dive post-COVID and into the cost of living crisis, asking that community about rights and the law was nothing but negative responses. They were had they got to the end of their tether with trust in their institutions, and you scale that up, and then you see the kind of outcomes the OECD have got, which is 1 in 4 people believe in their governments, and that makes them prone to misinformation. And that we are also seeing. And I think there's a question later about quality standards, and with the thrust of misinformation and people at such low levels of capability, you've got a perfect time bomb with people just not trusting your justice institutions.
So those who are digitally excluded, how do we remove the barriers for them to be able to access online?
There are some networks of provision which are digital only. So, there is library work, there's digital support work going on. From a justice-specific perspective, if it doesn't recognise, and I think we know this from the data from We Are Digital, and the precursors was, if there isn't an advice-based or legal capability element in there, you're not going to get the help you need. If you're dealing with a justice issue, just being able to talk how to move your mouse around is not cutting the mustard. So it is about collaboration. It is about reaching the people who are completely offline and doing it through the community intermediaries who people trust. They don't trust in bigger institutions. They trust their health providers. They trust their advice agencies. They trust their faith groups. So it's finding those key intermediary groups and providing that support there to get those people. They are being left behind, and it is having a catastrophic effect. But there are ways we can bridge.
Getting that community support as well.
Absolutely.
You wanted to come in?
On several things that Lisa touched on. The first is, digitalization, I think by now, none of us is under any illusion that it is by itself a silver bullet, not with a quarter of the population digitally excluded. We're talking about 16 million people. That's quite a lot. I think the problem isn't lack of information. We're pretty much rolling in it, online, that is. It is how findable, for lack of a better word right now, how findable it is, how accurate it is, how trustworthy it is. And I'm concerned because there were opportunities, and there have been for some years, to do something about it. For example, in the immediate aftermath of LASPO, there was a body called the Law Commission that was put together in order to try and see, with the much reduced resourcing that the sector had, how do we make the most of what we had? And one of the ideas that was raised even then was kite marking reliable sources that already exist online, to give them some sort of privileged status, so they would know that people who would know nothing else would know that this would be a more trustworthy source of information for that. That was never taken up, and because of government refusal. So that's one thing. Talking about online tools that are meant to be standalone for people to self-service. Some of them, yes, by some legal bodies may not have been up to par, but I would say I've not seen that promising performance also on the part of the Ministry of Justice. To give an example, several years ago they launched an online tool to help people understand what to do when they encounter disrepair in their home, in their rented home. And I can, and it follows the gov.uk guidelines, so the language is simple, pitched at the level of a 14-year-old, and it is accessible in that respect. But ultimately, if you go through it now, it's still available. When I get through to the end, and it is sensitive to your circumstances and all that, the picture it generates doesn't answer a specific question that I would want to know. Where do I start? It tells me options. Oh, you could contact this, contact that. Where do I start? What do I do first? What do I do then? You know, it's not designed with the practical needs of advice seekers in mind. Because it's not just there to inform, of course. It is there to guide practically in action. And I think that there's, there are very good examples of how to do that. The Advicenow website is obviously one of them. I would say that, wouldn't I? But yeah, and also I would like to nod at the HMCTS, at the Courts and Tribunal Service, for taking a long-awaited step in the way that they're commissioning for assisted digital services. The court system has invested considerably in digitalization with variable results, but what they have been doing now in commissioning for the next contract of providers for the assisted digital service is breaking it down, so it isn't restricted to one national provider and allows smaller regional advice sector actors to come in and invites their input to co-design a delivery that makes use of what is already there and supports what is already there through that. I think we could be doing so much more in that vein.
Thank you. And Tessa.
Thank you. So I just looked it up, and it says that the gov.uk website is not kite marked. It's quite interesting. I mean, it says it's for, physical products and specific service quality standards, which I would have thought was what that was, but hell, clearly adrift somewhere. I just wondered if what current technological developments, and actually to try and get you to look forward a little bit, let's just do a bit of future gazing. What might be there already and what might come along that will help us with access to justice, and whether there's some sort of scope between the advice agencies and the legal tech sector to try and improve all of this. Does one of you want to have a pop at that one, or...?
I'll start with the negative and then let people do the, because you've got some good positives, which I haven't. Well, I just think it's really important in the committee here, because we've been pressing this point. We're a year into Google AI overviews. It's the single biggest AI platform. the health sector has been moving very quickly to try and raise flags. It could be an opportunity to synthesise great information of the best quality, verified justice information or health information, so users get to their law centre, or they get to ourselves, or to the better bits of gov.uk. The reality is we're seeing a huge decline in click-throughs, 15 to 30%, depending on the different types of provider. People are not being always sent to localised provision. You might look up your health and safety and find yourself in New Jersey. Or in the health sector, we've got examples of false advice on pancreatic cancer. It has hit us at such a speed that anything else we're doing on tech development has had to pause completely. I've spoken to citizens advice law centres. Our good content is no longer being made available because we are being absolutely swamped by, particularly Google AI. We're trying to talk to them. There needs to be a sector-wide response, some sector-wide advocacy, as health is doing at speed. Getting a handle on that and using the better opportunities of Google summaries, so the best stuff is there for users, could be a bonus. But at the moment, all our innovation track has been sort of ground to a halt because pretty much every advice agency, particularly the digital side, is no longer able to meet the needs of users in the same way because of such a fast disruption in the last year.
Thank you. I think, just building on that, what we're doing is moving from search, traditional pathways, to answer engines. And, new generations come on. I've got teenagers. They don't search. They want the answer. They believe it and they go. So the challenge is immense. And the generations that will come in the future needing advice will be looking very differently at the way they do it. I think we're doing work with advice services around how they use their own small language, their own content, their own information to enable them to answer clients better. I think it's a really important part of that process to recognise that the source of the information has to be controlled and managed. And I think that whole effort around where is the good quality information that AI can build on and use is really important. And again, as part of government, there is a real opportunity to build on how that is understood and kite-marked and recognised as this you can trust, this you have to question. We're very early stages of working with one organisation that we are doing a lot of AI work around in terms of how AI might at some point become the first person to ask the questions of the advice seeker rather than behind the scenes. That is a way off, but they are looking at generating models of AI that can understand human emotion and body language as well as what they're actually asking. Because often what we hear from our advice services, it's not the thing they come in and tell you about, I'm about to lose my house, I haven't paid the rent. When you ask the right questions, you feel the whole problem. And I think it's a way off, but the rapidity of which advice is moving in the direction of using AI, I think if it's harnessed in the right way, it enables advisors to help those that can self-serve in a more effective way, so you get the answer at the end, not a whole range of options, and it frees up the advice services and the specialists to focus on the individuals who will always be in that place of digital exclusion because they live in rural Wales and there's no phone signal anyways, you can't get any digital access, or there's complex need. So I think it's, as part of thinking about how we support digital exclusion now, we have to fast forward 4 years because it's moving fast, it's changing fast. And I think certainly from our members, 40% of them are really keen on considering how to use AI, but only 4% have done it because there just isn't the resource, the time and the money to help them do that. And it keeps coming back to that really boring thing. And you say the opportunities to grow and move that forward in a more coordinated way should help us get more people access.
The addition to the investment on R&D, because we are staff, we don't have proper R&D money, we need that investment, but good to see government making several announcements on very, very large partnerships with some of the big tech providers. We would want to see some of that capacity being brought on. I've been able to attract good Google talent onto my board. That's rare and hard to find, but really there needs to be a kind of construction of these large partnerships, help us build that capacity, invest in us. You'll get some great wins. There's great opportunity there, but it's really about managing risk as well, which it takes a little bit of investment and some good people involved.
They need to be partnerships that run the distance as well.
Absolutely.
But the problem is that we're seeing in law centres is that tech partners would come to us with pre-designed products and you know, looking for adaptation rather than having the kind of knowledge that we have serve as the basis of that innovation. So we would love more of that. And also, in terms of the funding structure, I think it's really important not to think about it just as seed funding. Seed funding, you know, for initial development up to minimum viable product, that sort of thing, is all well and good. But, you know, we need to think about longer term development. You know, once you have a product, you need to factor in its maintenance, its further development, its branching out, and those are, I think we're really barely at the foothills of that in terms of what's available at the moment.
I mean, what I would very quickly say, I mean, AI has been around for 3 years. How it's come from, you know, how it's developed, how quickly. I mean, who can predict what it's going to be like in another 3 years' time, how rapidly it's developing. One of the real big problems with AI is that it extracts all the information from the websites with regards to legal information. It doesn't know what's right, what's wrong. It's that information that it's extracting. If AI could recognise what's good law and what isn't good law, or what sites do provide, you know, the right information, that would be something that would be incredibly useful.
Well, we know we've had judges, haven't we, who are using duff cases that just don't exist, so there's a bit of rigour that's needed in all of this. I think you've answered everything that I wanted to ask, really.
Very good.
Yeah, top job, eh?
No, they're a good panel. They're good. Precise. Accurate. When we come to mark you later.
That's
no,
right.
that is all we have for you this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed
for listening.
Attending. No, it's been very, very helpful indeed. But with that, I will end today's session.